Singgit, singgit!
Good morning, everyone. I just want to
Thank
remind
you for believing
that
in this mission. I look forward to the productive conversation.
once again, good morning, everyone. I just want to remind that our online registration is currently open. So if you haven't already registered, please take a moment to do so. Our dedicated language student society officers are virtually here to assist you with any questions you might have regarding the online registration process. Thank you. Manajon Ado, greetings from Anubo tribe and welcome to the second Elmo International Lecture Series on Applied Linguistics. In our interconnected world, language serves not just as a tool for communication, but as a bridge to understanding cultures, ideas, and identities. Today, we are privileged to gather a diverse community of scholars, educators, and language enthusiasts who share a passion for exploring the language in practical contexts. Si Luella Jane, and I am delighted to be your host for today's event. Salamat Kadiel for joining us from various corners of the globe as we embark on this exciting journey into the world of applied linguistics together. As we begin our second Alma International Lecture Series on Applied Linguistics, let's take a moment to center ourselves and acknowledge the significance of this gathering. Please take a moment to bow your head as we reflect and seek guidance for our discussion today, and inviting everyone to join in singing along with pride and unity as we honor our nation, the singing of the Philippine National Anthem.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we come to you today to praise and worship you and give you thanks for all the things you continue to provide for ourselves and our families. Father, we humbly ask for forgiveness for all the times you have offended you. Continue to guide and protect us, Lord. Bestow upon us your unending grace and healing, that we may in turn become instruments of gentleness and compassion to others. We ask all this in the name of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, with prayer and intercession of our Blessed Mother. Amen.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اللهم اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. اللهم وحد صفوفنا بين المسلمين والنصارى واللوماد إلى صراطك المستقيم. اللهم امنحهم العيش بالأمن والسلامة والتنمية المستدامة في مدينة دافاو. اللهم لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Amoy nen manama kami gimot talangon, manotod kakaroson no, si koyko kami tokul talangon, way migtumpi to tana, si koyko kami bohoy to pagpianan talangon na maoto, usako kapusong no, kana akong to pabulos koy, o agbuyo koyko, way bohoy kat pabor, kahalaan, kalinaw, to kanami, no pag-ugpo, way kasabok kakoy, oyot kalambo. Kay puro tamana kakodin panubad way pag-ampo, kaupianan igboy no, way kakoy kong imo no, way kahalaan ko lang.
Gusto kong mas lisod.
Susihanan na lang.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiging dalas ng sinananan, alam ng puso, sa dinig mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa manlulupin, di ka pasisingil, sa nagalang tulong sa simulan, sa langit o pagaw, ay hinatang tulakaw, isang pagkayang minamahal, ang isang ang matawag mo'y tagumpay na naghihiling, ang ituwin at araw niya, kailan pa may maghihiling, lumalang araw ng walang pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang higaya na pagkay mga amin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo. Tanging pamantasan naming mahal, tampok ng timog nilanaw. Ang liwanag mo'y aming ilaw sa labas ng karunungan. Resipin namin na sa'yong pangarap, ang pag-asa bandera ng matanghal nitong bansa. USDP pangantasan naming lihat, handog sa'yo'y puri at bulaklak. Ang pangalan mo ay itatanya, bandera mo'y itataas. Ang pangalan mo ay itatanya, USDP naming
To officially open today's event, we are honored to welcome the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Professor Marnie Grace Sunico, to deliver the welcome address. Dr. Sunico?
The Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Jennifer Sinueva, to the Director of the Institute of Languages and Creative Arts, Mr. Francis Enregenio, to the Program Head of the Bachelor of Arts in English Language, Associate Professor Sajid Bingilan, to the Program Head of the Master of Arts in Applied Literature, and at the same time, the Graduate Program Head and the Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Ms. Joy R. Resolar, to the Language Students Society Officers, to the faculty and students of the Master of Arts in Applied Linguistics and Bachelor of Arts in English Language programs, esteemed guests, respected speakers, distinguished participants, and fellow colleagues, good morning. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome you all to the second Ilmu International Lecture Series on Applied Linguistics, in collaboration with the Institute of Languages and Creative Arts. We are delighted to have you with us today as we come together to explore the exciting and dynamic field of applied linguistics, a discipline that bridges the gap between theory and practice, language and society. This series, now in its second, represents a unique opportunity for academics, researchers, practitioners, and students from around the world to engage in meaningful dialogue and exchange ideas that will shape the future of language research and application. Over the course of this event, we are set to hear from a range of distinguished speakers, each bringing this expertise and insights on a wide array of topics within applied linguistics. As we delve into the key issues of language acquisition, sociolinguistics, language policy, multilingualism, language education, and more, we are reminded of the critical role that applied linguistics plays in addressing the complex linguistic challenges of our increasingly interconnected world. Whether it is in understanding how languages evolve, how language affects identity and power, or how we can enhance language teaching and learning, the insights we gain here will undoubtedly enrich both academic and real-world applications. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my gratitude to all those who have made this event possible, our organizing committee, speakers, and all of you who have joined us from various corners of the globe. Your commitment to the enhanced advancement of linguistic knowledge and its application is truly inspiring. I encourage you to engage fully with the lectures, participate in the discussions, and take advantage of the networking opportunities that this series provides. Together, we can continue to push the boundaries of what we know about language and contribute to its development in the new and innovative ways. Once again, thank you for being part of this exciting journey. I look forward to the stimulating discussions and exchanges that will unfold over the course of this lecture series. Wish you all a productive and inspiring event.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sunico. As we continue with our program, we are honored to hear from the three esteemed scholars who bring with them a wealth of knowledge and inspiration from across the globe. Each of them has made significant contributions to the field of linguistics, and their insights today are sure to enrich our understanding and motivate our pursuits. To begin, let's extend a warm welcome to Dr. Muhammad Alakad from the University of Malaya, Malaysia. Dr. Muhammad, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hi everyone. Assalamu alaikum and good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, that's perfect. So I'm really happy attending this session today, and I'm glad we have many students I can see so far, and the staff member, faculty member as well. I can see also my former lecturer and supervisor, Prof. Rodney, is around, Rodney Jubilado. Thank you, Prof. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for asking.
It's my pleasure, bro. So now let me start. But before that, please allow me to share my slide. I have prepared a few slides. Oh yes, please allow me. Okay, yeah. Now it's okay. I can share. Okay. So today we are going to speak about this very impressive and fascinating topic and timely topic as well. So we are going to speak about how AI is impacting our academic writing and research writing. So the topic will be AI in academic writing, enhancing clarity and elevating humanity. Nowadays, there is some concern about the use of AI in academic writing, and some lecturers, staff, and faculty member were frustrated by the use of academic writing by the use of AI in academic writing, and sometimes they are also frustrated about by the academic bias against the AI tools. So if you are using AI for writing your research paper or article or whatever, so reviewers might be working against you. Reviewers might be working against you in terms of academic bias and in terms of the using of AI in your academic paper. So if you are using AI, as we mentioned, in your academic writing without disclosing that, it might be ending up with a rejection of your article or research paper or even your thesis writing. But most reviewers cannot tell if your academic paper was written by AI, because now we have very modern and very sophisticated tools that even the reviewers or academic supervisors in the university, the colleges, they cannot even simply detect whether these texts were produced by a human or by AI. So this changes how we think about academic writing. And here we have some researches and some articles, research teams who have made some fascinating and impressive research papers about this. We are going to discuss it shortly. So many researchers like feeling that reviewers are working against them, assuming AI makes work less authentic. But here is the irony. Most reviewers, even as we mentioned, cannot tell if the paper was enhanced by AI or AI enhanced or human written. Because even like here in the universities, And everywhere, I believe as well, most of the academic reviewers, academic supervisors, normally we have to use the AI detection system, which is embedded in Turnitin. And nowadays, there are some sophisticated tools, even Turnitin cannot detect. And of course, there's a huge percentage of detection, sometimes reach 70 or 80, 80 or 70%, but this percentage is not trustworthy most of the time. So research finding on AI enhanced writing. A researcher, as we mentioned, a researcher conducted a study with top reviewers from most of the Scopus ISI journals, like Springer, like also what we call some of the top AI and IEEE journals. Most of those reviewers who are reviewing these papers, they have been questioned to do to answer some kind of survey and a questionnaire to answer this study. So what they found that AI assisted papers were seen as more honest. Reviewers struggled to tell which is written by AI or which one is human written. So their judgment on the research quality stayed at the same. Those familiar with AI rated clarity higher. AI generated and the human written paper were rated equally, meaning that they cannot detect which one is written by AI or which one is written by human, which is which. Because of that, they are feeling and they are seeing the language is perfect in both texts, and the human judgment is also important in the language or the context written by AI. Sometimes there are some points missing there. We are going to speak about these points. What reviewers valued most? Of course, the reviewers or the supervisors, academic supervisor, they valued the human touch in every manuscript that the student writing. So reviewers valued one thing above all, your unique perspective. As a student or as a writer, we want to see your unique perspective, not the AI perspective, because it's quite similar and quite easy to trace whether this is a human written perspective, a human touch, or AI generated touch. Personal insight. We want to see what is your personal thought, what is your insight, and the critical thinking, critical analysis. Deep expertise, this is also important, which usually cannot be generated by AI, because normally AI generated text, it keeps generating data analysis and expertise based on the service of the language, not deeply in the critical analysis of a language. Logical flow, there's sometimes gaps in the logical flow written or generated by AI. So we want to see these things in the human writing text. Most of the writers nowadays and most of the academic authors and academic supervisors, they start allowing the student to use AI in academic writing, even in research dissertation or thesis. They start allowing the student in a point that we want to see a letter or a statement at the end of your writing that these sections were generated by AI. But of course, not everything should be generated, because we want to see, as we mentioned, we want to see your unique perspective. We want to see your personal insight, critical analysis, deep expertise, and the logical flow between the chapters or the logical flow between the section of the article. So this shows that AI future in academic writing is not about hiding AI rule, but revealing our humanity within it. So interestingly also, here we are going to speak about how to balance between AI and human input. So how do we strike this balance? There are 5 steps in order to strike the balance between AI and the human input. First of all, use AI for readability, especially for non-native English speakers. Keep your voice. AI is a tool, not a co-author. You have to make sure in your writing AI is a servant, not the master. You are the master who's managing and leading AI. AI is not going to lead you. So you have to keep this in your mind. AI is the servant and you are the master. So keep your voice. AI is a tool, not a co-author. Add personal perspective. Emphasize your unique angle. Focus on quality, depth, and methodology matter. Maintain logical flow. So the maintaining of logical flow here, we need to make sure AI can help in the structure, but real coherence comes from you as an author. And also interestingly, we found that what we call for researchers who's using AI, they quietly use AI to improve their language, because most of the researchers who are using AI, they are using it because AI or English is not their first language. Most of the AI generated text users are English non-native speakers. So for researchers with English as the second or third language, AI here is extremely helpful in crafting clearer and more readable manuscript, as well as relieving researchers of that extra burden. In that sense, it contributes to a more efficient process on all ends. The authors, the reviewers, and the end readers, who will find the piece smoother to read. Second, and more interestingly also, one should always treat AI as a servant, as we mentioned, as a tool that is going to help you, not the master. With conscious, well-framed task, AI can do wonders to make the most burdensome steps of writing and reviewing a bit more bearable, while maintaining the integrity of the ideas, efforts, and scrutinizing human analysis. So the most important, as we mentioned, we have to follow these 5 steps in order to make a balance between human and AI input. So now we have to call for a transparency and integrity between in the use of AI. The future of AI, as we mentioned, is not about concealing AI use. It is about being transparent and responsibly integrating it. AI can improve, as we mentioned, clarity for everyone, authors, reviewers, and readers. Remember, AI won't replace the researcher's work. It's here to assist, but not to take over of your work as a researcher or as a writer or as a student even. So we should aim to elevate our writing while keeping our voice authentic. So what is the inspiring next generation of researchers? So the inspiring next generation of researchers, here we have some takeaway. AI has the power to transform research writing by enhancing accessibility and innovation. Embrace AI's strength, stay actively involved, and use the transparency to build a credible future for AI in academia. You are most welcome as a student to use AI. But before using AI, you have to reverse back to check the guidelines and terms and conditions for your college or your university, whether they allow some percentage for using AI in your academic writing or not. A question to audience. Here we have to mention that for the student or the staff or faculty member who are using AI, how can we as a researcher responsibly integrate AI without compromising academic writing? This is very interesting. We have nowadays, there is no way to disregard the use of AI in academic writing and every part of the human life. It is important to use it, and it's going to enhance many aspects in the academic writing or in even the teaching process. But the most important part is we have to keep the human touch. Otherwise, step by step, after a few years, you won't be able even to write a single piece of abstract, or even you won't be able to review an article without the assistance of AI. If you keep using AI and you replace your mind with AI, because step by step, you will even start losing your own vocabs, your own language, because AI is going to replace your own identity, your own language. So this is what we concerned about. Here we have the last question, and it's open for all. So what is the role of AI in academic writing from your own perspectives? So here we end this session, and I hope you got some insight and some ideas from this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alakat, for those enlightening points. Next, we have, or maybe you have any questions? Or maybe we can get back to that later. And now, may we have Associate Professor Dr. Nasirin Abdullah from University Technology Mara, Malaysia, whose work has deeply influenced the field. Dr. Abdullah, we're so delighted to have you with us.
Good morning. Magandang araw. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Abdullah, you're loud and clear.
Thank you. All right. Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. So thank you for inviting me for to give a little bit of inspirational message for this international lecture series on applied linguistics. So it's truly a privilege to connect with you from across the world, united by our shared commitment to understanding language and its profound impact on human connection, education, and culture. Now we are facing the so-called digital era with the bombardment of IT in the academia. So I'm especially honored to be addressing such an inspiring audience here in the Philippines, where there is such a rich tapestry of languages, dialects, and linguistic heritage. So as we gather here, even though through Zoom, not physically, so I want to remind each of us here, including myself, of something incredibly powerful. The work that we are doing in applied linguistics is much more than an academic exercise. So it's a journey of discovery, a tool for social change, and a path toward creating a world that values understanding and empathy. So each of us brings our unique perspectives and insights to this field. Some of you might be focusing on language acquisition, others on sociolinguistics, others on teaching methods of policy, or even the use of AI in writing. But all of us, in one way or another, we are working to bridge gaps between languages, between cultures, between individuals. So we are contributing to the possibility of connection across barriers that too often divide us. So one thing that makes applied linguistics especially meaningful is its tangible impact on people's lives. So in the Philippines alone, you may have more than 170 languages spoken across the islands. So think about what that means. Every linguistic choice you make as researchers, educators, or policymakers has the potential to shape people's lives, to honor their identities, and to give them a voice. So, in fact, one of the most valuable things I've come to understand in my own work, and perhaps you have too, is that language is more than just a tool for communication. So it's a vessel for identity, culture, and dignity. When we work in applied linguistics, we are not just analyzing words or sounds, we are affirming people's sense of self, their right to be understood, and their right to belong. So this brings me to the idea of cultural sensitivity in language studies. So I recently developed a framework called Chakra, which I had the honor of Um, presenting to an audience in the Philippines a short while ago. So this model is designed to help us think critically and compassionately about cultural context in language studies and language education. So Chakra encourages us to look beyond language as a neutral tool and to see it as a dynamic force shaped by and shaping the cultural realities of the people who use it. So when we adopt this perspective, we become not just linguists, but advocates for equity and inclusion. So as you participate in this lecture series, I encourage you to think about your work through this lens. Ask yourself, how does my research, my teaching, my policy work make a difference in people's lives? So how am I honoring the voices of those who may feel marginalized? How am I contributing to a world where linguistic diversity is valued, where learners of all backgrounds are empowered, and where understanding is the goal above all else? So, to the students here, let me say this. The field of applied linguistics needs your energy, creativity, and compassion. You are not just learning a set of skills, you are preparing to be change makers in education, policy, and intercultural communication. Embrace this opportunity with humility, but also with courage. Push boundaries, ask hard questions, and seek answers that help others feel seen and heard. So, to my colleagues, I urge us to stay curious and to remember that our work matters. We may sometimes find ourselves caught in the minute of data analysis, curriculum design, or policy drafting. But let's not lose sight of the people we are ultimately here to serve, the students, the communities, the language learners who took us for support, understanding, and validation. So, in conclusion, let us remember that applied linguistics is more than a field of study. It is a calling to contribute to a better, more inclusive world. So, each of us, in our own way, has the power to make that happen. So, thank you for being here, for caring about language, and for being part of a community that strives to make a difference. So together we can shape a world where every voice is valued, every language is respected, and every person is empowered to be understood. Again, thank you, and I wish you a transformative experience in this series.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah, for sharing those powerful insights. And now it's a privilege to introduce Associate Professor Dr. Roddy C. Jubilado from the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Dr. Jubilado?
Hey, thank you. Maayong gabi sa tanan, gikan sa Los Angeles, California. So let me start with a quote from our new president here in America, Trump, and forget this afterwards. Nothing great in the world has been accomplished without passion. End of the story. Now, thanks to my classmate and friend, my very good friend, Professor Dr. Marnie Grace and Trina Sonico, and also to Yang Bahagya, Professor Madhya Sajid Ingilan, and also to my former student here, Muhammad Alakad, yeah, thank you for greeting me earlier. And of course, to my dear classmate in at the National University of Singapore, Nasrin Abdillah. And thank you also all dear organizers for having me here at the second ilmu International Lecture Series on Applied Linguistics. And I always see familiar names, faces, including that of my um, one of my very good friends in Kuala Lumpur and former colleague, Professor Dr. Maya Khemlani David of the Faculty Bahasa dan Linguistic and the Asia Europe Institute of the University of Malaya. And it feels good to read the name of the other speaker, Dr. Gerald Broche from La Trobe University of Australia. Back home in Hawaii, especially at the University of Hawaii, and this great seal of the state of Hawaii, we say this way, Owamau ki iya o kaaina ikapuno. That's Hawaiian, which means the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. It starts with your surrounding, it starts with the land, it goes back to the ancestry and to all the things that we will learn and we must learn. And so that starts with the simple greetings in Hawaii with the word aloha, meaning love. As such, I should be brief. I strongly believe that everyone can learn from our esteemed speakers. Please treasure the knowledge that these experts and scholars are going to share with you all. And most of all, apply such knowledge and see what it brings you in your research under applied linguistics. And don't forget what I said earlier, coming from President Donald Trump. Nothing great in the world has been accomplished without passion. In other words, put passion in there in your research. Mahalo, gracias, salamat po, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alaka, Dr. Avila, and Dr. Javilado for the inspirational messages. Your words have truly set a motivating tone for today's discussion. Now, to lead us into the heart of today's lecture series, we have the pleasure of welcoming a valued member of our language faculty, Sir Philip Andrew Garlitos, who will introduce our first international lecturer. Sir Philip?
Thank you so much. Am I audible? Okay, so maayong buntag. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce the first international lecturer this morning. She is currently an honorary professor at the Asia Europe Institute at the University of Malaya, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. She is a former member of the Faculty of Languages and Linguistics, University of Malaya, and adjunct professor of the Jaipuria Institute of Management, Lucknow. She is an associate member of the International Institute of Public Policy and Management, University of Malaya, and associate section editor for Journal of English and Applied Linguistics. She is an honorary fellow of Chartered Institute of Linguistics in UK and is an exco member of an international NGO, Foundation of Endangered Languages. She received the Lingua Pax Award for her work on language maintenance and shift. Her intellectual interests center on language planning, language choices, maintenance and shift, and discourse analysis. She is the author of numerous books, and her publications include works in the fields of social linguistics and social cultural issues and applied linguistics. Fellow scholars, let us welcome virtually our first international lecturer who will talk about language revitalization strategies, importance of investigating reasons for language shift. Professor Dr. Maya Kamlani David.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. David.
My apologies. I was trying to unmute myself. I thought the controls were at your end. Thank you very much, everybody. Good morning. I'm honored and happy to share with you a research area that I have been taking a great interest in ever since I graduated with my PhD dissertation on language maintenance. But today I want to talk to you about revitalization strategies. Thank you for controlling my PowerPoint, and perhaps we can move on to the next slide. Philip, thank you so much for introducing me. Now, just to give you a background, we have a database which you can find on the internet, which says there are 28 endangered Philippine languages compared with 13 in 2016. So over a period of 8 years, the number of endangered languages in the Philippines have moved from 13 to 28. So a lot of languages are dying or are endangered. So when we talk about revitalization, we need to know how threatened are these endangered languages? How endangered are they? According to the ethnologue, although they talk about 28 endangered languages, they emphasize that there are 11 languages threatened with extinction. So these 11 languages we should focus on because some are already extinct. So if they are already extinct and there's no last speaker of that language, then there is little that can be done unless there are documented materials of that language. But if it was a spoken language and it has not been written anywhere and nobody is using it now, then there is a problem. So let's look at the 11 languages that are cited in the ethnologue to see which of these still are, although they are threatened, but there are still some speakers using that language. So there is possibility of revitalizing if there are some speakers still alive using that language, if there are documented materials of that language, if you can get the community interested and encouraged to use that language. So there are many, many ifs when you talk about endangered languages or you talk about languages which are threatened. I did some research for this talk, and in Mindanao itself, there are more than 130 languages spoken, which was mentioned by the previous speaker. And some of these languages that are more widely spoken, you can see on the slide. But we must remember, in most countries, even in Malaysia, the languages spoken by the what we call the Orang Asli or the Orang Asal, which is the original people of the country, they are being lost because the community is moving towards using the national language Malay rather than their own ethnic languages. So we did a study of one of these Orang Asli groups, and we went to their village, which happened to be not very far away from where our university is. And we went as a large group of 16 researchers, and each of us were told were given specific tasks. So some of them were looking at numbers. How do you say numbers in those languages? Others were asked, how do you address people? What are the pronouns used? And so on. And we talked to them. And when we asked them even something as simple as the numeral system, how do you say one in your language? How do you say two? And so on. Many of them had actually already forgotten the original languages because they had become so used to speaking the national language. So we need to know if there is a community that is still having some knowledge of the original language. And then we need to document it in that case if there is no documentation of that language. On the other hand, if you have a community that has a lot of materials of their ethnic language, all the materials are in archives or in libraries, but the people themselves are not using the language, then you do not need to document that language. You need to encourage the people to use the language. So what I'm saying is that with revitalization, it depends on the level of the endangerment of the language. If the language is not has documented materials, then you as language activists, you as scholars, don't need to document the language. You don't need to go and ask them like we had to do with our Mamari people. We had to ask them, we had to write it down, we had to create a dictionary, and we had to create written materials in that language by talking to the people, asking them questions. We went to that village many, many times as a group of 16 researchers. So, but the end product was a dictionary. The end product were 2 books, one in the national language, one in English, where we talk about the different aspects of that language known as the Mamari language. So something came out of it in terms of book materials, in terms of documented materials, but we have now to go on to encourage the people to use the language. There's no point having materials that are documented lying in a library or in archives or in the community center where we kept our materials in the community center of this community. But nobody is still really using the language much because they live near a Malay community and there is a lot of assimilation with the Malay language. So it is the level of use of the other language and the reasons for the use of the other more dominant languages that we have to worry about and then use the appropriate revitalization strategy. So let's move on to the next slide. Next slide, please. So these are the languages that are threatened and in Philippines, and you need to see who is threatening the original languages. And you can see that generally it is Tagalog and English. Yesterday I was at a PhD Viva examination written by a Filipino speaker, and she comes from your area. And she was saying that the dominant language now and the home language is Ilocano, Tagalog, and English. But the home language is Ilocano, and Tagalog is taking over quite a bit in the public domain. So you need to know if the language is still being used in the home domain, that's good. That means it's still alive. But if it's used in the home domain, it depends on who is using it with whom. For example, if the parents are speaking in Tagalog, but the grandparents are speaking in Ilocano, and when the children reply, the grandchildren reply, they reply to the grandparents in Tagalog or English. There's a danger there because although the language Ilocano and Tagalog is being used in the home, but the children are not really responding in Ilocano. They may respond in Tagalog or English. So this is what happened in Singapore also. In Singapore, at one time, the Prime Minister at that time, Lee Kuan Yew, he told the majority community in Singapore, that is the Chinese community, that they should not speak their dialects, that they should speak only Mandarin. Now, what happened then as a result over time is grandparents in the home domain could not speak with the grandchildren because the grandparents knew the dialects and the grandchildren were learning Mandarin in schools. So there was a non-communication, and the parents tried, but the parents also had moved a lot to English. English has become a fairly dominant language in Singapore. And you see that the Chinese community, the Indian community in Singapore are all moving away from the Indian community moving to English to a great extent, and the Chinese community have moved away from the dialogues to Mandarin and English. So we need to know what are the languages that are taking the place of the original language. And here in this slide, I've given you some examples. Next slide, please. So we move on to understanding the factors that influence language shift. Why have the different communities that I've spoken to you about shifted from their original ethnic language, their heritage language, to another language? Generally, the other language is the more dominant language. In Malaysia, for example, many of the Indian communities, and when I say Indian, you know that there are speakers of the North Indian languages and of the South Indian languages. So when we say Indian, we're not talking about one language, but of many, many languages. Generally, by large, many of them have moved to the English language, which gives them economic power. And if they are moving up the social ladder, then it also gives them the ability to move in certain high-paying jobs if they have proficiency in the English language. But there are political reasons also which create language shift. As I told you, in Malaysia, a lot of the children, the orang asli, the first people of the nation, that the children go to government schools where Malay is the medium of instruction. So language policy, the educational policy can also create language shift. And this, I did a study of one of these communities, the Orang Asli communities, and what has happened is the children now are more used to using the national language Malay because it has become the medium of instruction in schools and the language of interaction with the other ethnic groups. Now, demographic here means if the community is very, very small, like in Malaysia, my ethnic community, the Sindhi community, we are only 1,000 in a country where we have a huge population. So 1,000 is nothing. We are a minority of a minority. So when you are a minority community, also, what happens is you tend to assimilate to the majority community. And a lot of the Sindhi community, depending on what generation they are, the second generation who came to Malaysia, they are more comfortable in using English because at that time we had the British colonial government and the medium of instruction was English. And the younger generation, if they go to private schools, then the English is the medium of instruction. If they go to government schools, then Malay is the medium of instruction. And depending on their socioeconomic standing, they either go to public or private schools. And because the community is moving upwards economically, many of them go to private schools. And so the home language in many of the Sindhi homes has become English, where the first generation, who came to Malaysia, don't speak English much, but many of them are no more with us. But the second and third generation are more familiar and more comfortable and use English much more than they use Sindhi. And many of them don't even know the Sindhi language. So the next point, and I want to emphasize this point, is attitudinal. In many of the studies, this point is not mentioned. Attitudinal means here, what is the attitude of the community towards their own ethnic language? Do they see it as old-fashioned? Do they see it as not giving them power in the job front? Do they see it as not helping them socially to mix with others? Do they see their ethnic language not giving them any economic advantages? So, attitude, we need to see the attitude of the community towards their ethnic language. Because if we know the attitude, then we may use different ways of revitalizing the language, the use of the ethnic language. But if it's economic, social, political reasons, there may be other ways. So, for example, if it's the language policy, then perhaps we need to move into the domain of education and try to influence political leaders to introduce the use, the teaching of mother tongues. So, in short, language shift, which we must know why has the community moved away from their language before we can determine what strategy we can use to revitalize the language. So, language shift is therefore the result of a combination of many factors, including language ideologies. What is the attitude of the community towards their own language and other languages? Power differentials. Does English give them greater power to move into higher paying jobs and so on? Now, historical trauma is something many studies don't mention, but it is a fact. When I say historical trauma, let me give you the background to my own ethnic community that I just mentioned. Now, this community has no homeland of its own. This community is living in all countries of the world, including Manila, including the Philippines, including Davao. I have Sindhi relatives in Davao and in the Philippines. So why have they moved all over the world? Why don't they have a country of their own? We need to see what happened to this community from a historical point of view also. So just to give you a very quick idea, this community had to flee, run away from their homeland when India, the British India, was subdivided into two, into Pakistan and into India in 1947. And as a result of that, many Sindhi Hindus, because we have Sindhi Muslims too, but the Sindhi Muslims stayed back in Sindh, which is today part of Pakistan. But the Sindhi Hindus had to flee and they moved to first to India and then from India to all regions of the world. And there is a joke among the community that wherever you go, whether it's America, UK, the smaller islands in the Caribbean, Australia, you will find Sindhis because they have no homeland of their own. And if they have no homeland of their own, when we interviewed younger Sindhis, they didn't even know that they were Sindhis because when their parents fled from Sindh, Pakistan to India, the parents came into India as refugees. And when they came in as refugees, the larger Indian community made fun of them. So what they did was they hid their Sindhi identity by not using the Sindhi language. And many of the younger members of the community cannot speak Sindhi. They never heard it in their home front because their parents started using Hindi to assimilate with the larger Indian community in India then. So we need to know historical trauma. Now, other factors that cause language shift and movement away from the mother tongue or the heritage language. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So urbanization. I've just done a study in Pakistan among the Sindhi Muslims in Pakistan, and many of them are moving away from the rural areas to larger cities like Karachi and this or Islamabad, larger cities. And in these larger cities, the main languages spoken are Urdu and English. So they shift away from the Sindhi language. Even in Sindh, even in Pakistan, the Sindhi Muslims who moved to urban areas have shifted to Urdu and English. Ethnicity, when you want to hide your ethnic, what your ethnicity is, just like the Sindhis did when they first went to India, then of course they don't want to use their ethnic language. Gender issues. Gender issues, it depends whether it's the man or the woman in the house who is moving away from the heritage language. And so a study has to be done where which gender is moving away, even in the same community. Religion. Now, religion is something important. I have been looking at the Sindhi community in the Philippines, the Sindhi community in Indonesia, and in Malaysia, and in Singapore. And a new trend, a fairly recent trend, is a shift not only away from the language, the ethnic language Sindhi, but there's also a shift to another religion, mainly Christianity. And many Sindhis in the Philippines, in Manila, have moved to Christianity, not necessarily the Catholic religion, but other Christian religions. And in Indonesia too, in Jakarta, there is a fairly big community of Sindhis who have become Christians. In fact, there is not only there is an organization that goes around to different countries to encourage the Sindhis, mainly the Sindhi Hindus, to shift away from their Hindu religion to Christianity. And this is an NGO. Many of the people come from the UK and also from America. And they go to different countries every year, have a different conference. The secretary comes from Okinawa in Japan. So the idea is a shift away from religion. Now, when you shift away from your religion, then there is also a chance that you will move away from the use of the Hindu language associated with the religion, use of Sanskrit, and so on, to English. I talked to a young second generation Sindhi in Malaysia, and I asked her what language her mother used to pray, and she said her mother used the Devanagari script in India to pray. But she in Malaysia, she writes her prayers in English. So there's already a shift to another language, even in religion. Next, please. So looking at the reasons, so you need to, if you're looking at communities in the Philippines and you're looking at reasons for shift, basically, a lot of the literature that I have read is the education policy. The education policy and the shift to, in the past, historically, to Spanish during the Spanish regime, but then to during the American regime to English, and then to Tagalog, and then to mother tongue. And recently, I understand that there is legislation saying that the mother tongue need not necessarily be always used in the classroom at different levels. That you will have to read up about because this is a recent development, but also the shift in many places from rural areas to urban areas. So if you move from your village where mother tongue is used and you go to the urban area to work, and you go and not only to work, but once you work there, you might stay there for a long time, and your children are born there, you get married there, chances are you might shift to the majority language in the urban area. And then in the urban area, or even in your own area, you might find that the language of power that gives you socio-economic capital, that is another language, not your mother tongue, not your heritage language. And so for power, for economic advancement, for job opportunities, you will move to the other language. So as I said, before you think of revitalization, you have to find out why has the community moved away from their mother tongue, from their heritage language. Next slide, please. This is an example that I got from a book by a linguist in the Philippines, and he gives an example of how the mother tongue has been replaced with Ilocano in a specific area. So you have to look at which area you are looking at, which community you are looking at, which heritage language you are looking at, and what is the language they have shifted to and why. Yes, next slide, please. Government policies are a main reason why people move away from their ethnic language. I remember years ago when I was doing a study of the Sindhi community in Malaysia, what happened was when I talked to a grandfather, the first generation, he is now no more, and I asked him what is the language he uses with the grandchildren in the home domain. He said, and I remember these words so clearly, even though it was many years ago, he said, they go to a private school. English is the medium of instruction in the private school. What is the use of me speaking Sindhi to them? Nobody else in the larger community in Malaysia uses Sindhi. Very few community members are around. So I might as well make them proficient in English because the jobs that they will go into, they will have to use English. So this is the rationale given by people in the home domain itself. And if in the home domain the language moves away from heritage language, that's a danger of the language being lost. So so in a country like Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, we have multilingual, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious. These are multi-religious, multi-ethnic, multicultural countries, and so there are complex problems when it comes to language policy. So For example, even in the Philippines, a majority Christian country, you also have a large number of Muslims. And so in those areas, what language should be used? What is the policy of the parliament or the government in that region with regards to the use of Arabic? And is Arabic used in the madrasas, in the religious schools? Are there qualified Arabic teachers to teach them? And will it result in them moving away from the use of the mother tongue to Arabic, even in the home domain? So these are questions we have to ask, we have to study, we have to look at these Arabic teachers and the students learning Arabic to see whether even in the home domain, are they moving away from ethnic language to the Arabic language. The study that I looked at by a Filipino linguist, he said that they struggle, the Bangsamoro students struggle with the Arabic and English languages. But, you know, in a country with different religions, different languages, Malaysia, Singapore, many countries, we have multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious. So we have to see what is the situation in that culture, in that religious group, in that community, and how the government policy is affecting language use. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is the MTB MLE policy, and it has been said it's too late to stem language shift towards English among middle to upper class school children. So you have to see the socio-economic class of the community you are researching. Okay, so now I move on to revitalization, I think, in the next slide. So these are possible revitalization strategies. So far, I've been talking to you about why communities move away from their language. And I want to now talk to you about revitalization strategies. We have what we call top-down and bottom-up. Top-down means, what does the government do to help people go back to their mother tongues, you know? And bottom up is, what does the community itself do? What do language activists do to save languages, to save their heritage languages? So one example of a top-down policy is through government legislation, laws with regards to medium of instruction, laws with regards to national language use. So if more languages are given official status, then that would be good. I'll give you an example from Singapore. In Singapore, although English has become the dominant language of many communities, recently what happened was Singapore is actually an open country. They encourage people from India, from different countries to come and work in Singapore. And so a lot of Indians from India, the Indian subcontinent, came to Singapore, and they noticed that the only language that children could learn in school as an extra subject, Singapore has a policy of learning another language as an extra subject, and Indian kids were told they could learn only Tamil. Now, although at that time the majority of the Indian population in Singapore was Tamil, the Indian expats who came argued in favor of the other Indian languages like Hindi, Urdu, and so on. And so now the government has actually allowed schools to teach these other Indian languages, and saying Indian children can choose from these other Indian languages and not necessarily have to only choose Tamil. So the Singapore government policy was, you learn English, but you have to have one subject, which is of your heritage language. So Indian children had the choice of only Tamil. But now, because there has been a bottom up insistence to the government to introduce other North Indian and South Indian languages like Malayali, and that's a South Indian language, Malayalam, and a North Indian language like Hindi. So the government has now allowed schools to teach these languages as an extra subject in and not only Tamil. Now, apart from top-down policies, if you have the power and you know some members of parliament and you can help to change legislation, there is what we call bottom-up, where uh, communities, language activists can help saving languages. Uh, the community itself, the older members of the community realize it's important and they get some younger members to help to encourage people to use the language. But how many such communities exist? I will give you some examples of what the Sindhi community did. Let's move on. Next slide. So I'm giving you the example of the Sindhi Hindu community in diaspora all over the world. They have shifted, as I told you, because they have no country of their own. They are what is known a global diaspora, and there's mass migration away even from India to other countries. Although there is like 3 or 4 million Sindhi Hindus in India today. Yes, let's move on. So reasons for language shift among Sindhi Hindus. As I said, you need to know reasons before you talk about revitalization. So I'm giving you the example of this community, but you will have to look at the community you are studying to find out why they have shifted away. So number one here is the lack of social capital. When they moved to India, they didn't even want to be known as refugees, and they would have been known as refugees if they spoke the Sindhi language. So they stopped using the Sindhi language and they put priority on other languages in India, like Hindi. And many Sindhis have moved to Spain, and there they speak Spanish. Spanish has become the dominant language for them. They have adapted and assimilated to local languages. In India and even in other countries. But in India today, there is a strong bottom-up policy, bottom-up movement by the community to encourage people to be proud of being Sindhis, to be proud of using their language. So be proud of being Sindhi. And if you are proud of being Sindhi, how do we know you're Sindhi? Use Sindhi language. So the revitalization strategy means that activists, language activists from bottom up have to make them feel proud by showing them how successful the Sindhis have been, both in businesses and in charities. The Sindhi community in England, in India, is known for giving to others, to give to charities like education, hospitals, and so on. And they have been very successful from refugee status. They have now become very successful economically. Now, influence of education with English becoming the dominant language in private schools. So intergenerational transmission of the language has also been disrupted, with parents not passing on Sindhi in the home domain to their children. And also many mixed marriages. So Sindhi is being lost. So now how do I reintroduce Sindhi to a community that is using English? So make them feel proud that they are Sindhis, make them feel proud that if you are Sindhis, you have done well business-wise. Now do well by using your own language so that people know who you are. And so the bottom up, what they have done is they have used social media to encourage the community to use the Sindhi language. And there are many social media setups which actually encourage the community to use Sindhi. And what has also happened is they're not worried about documentation of the language because there are lots of documents in the Sindhi language kept in Sindhi libraries in India and even in Pakistan, because there are Sindhi Muslims in Pakistan, large majority. So there are libraries, there are materials. So we don't, as language activists, we don't have to encourage them to document the Sindhi language. In Pakistan, it is documented in the Arabic script. In India now, they're trying to document it in the Devanagari script because Sindhi has many scripts. So now they're telling the community, you have succeeded, you have economic success, you are now focused on cultural preservation. Focus on the preservation of your language. Don't only focus on material success. Next slide will show you the many Sindhi websites. Now, if you go to many of these Sindhi websites, the activists have created websites to revitalize the Sindhi language. The idea is to instill pride that you are Sindhi, to promote community solidarity through many cultural events. So you have songs, you have social media, you have online platforms. At one time during the COVID regime in the world, every night I was watching at midnight, Malaysian time, midnight, I was watching Sindhi programs in Sindhi and awareness of the richness of the Sindhi language, the richness of the community in terms of their heritage, in terms of music, dancing, and so on, and cultural shows. And I was revitalizing my own knowledge of the Sindhi language because the community in Malaysia doesn't use the language much. So I had to revitalize my own use through these websites. So if we can encourage one person to use the language, we should encourage a community to use the language through. And we are lucky nowadays, we have so many online databases and community bottom-up strategies. Next, please. Now, what they have done with the Sindhi language, we say they have gone one step down. They say you don't need to write the language. So long as you use the language, receptive knowledge of the language, understand the language, you hear, you understand, you speak. Don't worry about writing. Okay? So in a way, it's not encouraging them to write, but encouraging them to speak, at least speak in the home domain. So there have been competitions, language camps, and even today, every day on Facebook, I see messages like, do you want to learn the Sindhi language? There is a one-to-one free tuition for you to learn the language. And then there are competitions for children. Take part in a poetry competition in Sindhi, and we will give you prizes like Kindles. And so that every year there are competitions like this, and parents have to encourage their young children to say something in Sindhi, a poem in Sindhi, a story in Sindhi, and video record it so the parents are involved too. And then through technology, social media, the language activists aim to revitalize the Sindhi language through competitions, through games, through prizes, and reconnect the community to its cultural heritage. So it depends. Why is your community not using the language? What can you do to help them use the language? Do you need to use top down or do you need to use bottom up? If it's attitudinal, then you'll have to use bottom up to encourage them to use the language. So in this case, it's bottom up. Language activists are doing this. We're coming towards the end of the slides. Thank you for being patient. Next slide, please. Now, here I talk about the Sindhis in the Philippines. And what has happened, I'm not going to go through each of these points, but basically you have like 4,000 members of the Sindhi community, and many of them in Manila, many of them, they although they move within their communities and their friendships within the communities, because the dominant language in the environment is English, they have moved on to English. And so they have assimilated. And as I said, some of them have also assimilated to the religion, in this case, the Christian religion, mainly in Manila, the Catholic religion. So there is a lot of shift, not only language, but also religion. And so when language moves, religion moves, how do you retain cultural issues? So they're very aware. They are Sindhi. They mix together quite a lot. They have a lot of functions as Sindhis, but the language used in these functions by the younger generation is English. I also looked at the Sindhis in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and there a similar situation, where there's a lot of assimilation to the Indonesian language, but and some of them have also moved to the Christian religion. So there's a lot of assimilation because these are minority communities, just like in Malaysia, Sindhis are minority. In Philippines, they are minority. In Jakarta, they are minority. And when you're a minority, you tend to assimilate. So if you want to revitalize the language of these minority communities, you have to do a bottom-up policy. The government is not interested in having Sindhi as a medium of instruction for sure. There are so many other languages in the Philippines and in Indonesia. Next. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the Philippines faces a significant language endangerment crisis with some regional languages at risk. The Sindhi Hindu community, because most of my studies are on the Hindu community, although I've also done the Punjabi Sikh community, the Malayali community, the Telugu community in Malaysia. But I've done the Sindhi community in Malaysia, Singapore, UK, in London. The Sindhi Hindu community in diaspora has experienced substantial language shift due to geographical dispersion, lack of social capital, education, and cultural assimilation. Being a minority, they tend to assimilate with the larger communities. So to revitalize endangered languages, a combination of top-down and bottom-up strategies is necessary, including government legislation, depending, if you have the influence with government. If you're a minority community, then forget it. Documentation, if there's documentation, then forget about doing documentation. Education policies, again, if you belong to a minority community, minority language, then you can't change education policies. You can focus on bottom-up, community-led initiatives, cultural events like the Sindhis are doing, and language programs through social media like the Sindhi community is doing. Preserving cultural heritage and language requires promoting community solidarity. Make them aware you're a community. Make them be proud that they're a community. And if you're proud that you're a community, use your ethnic language. Encourage parents to use their language in the home domain, because once the language is lost in the home domain, it is lost. Use social media today for language education. So in short, collaborative efforts from governments, communities, individuals, language activists are essential to promote language and the use of the heritage languages. So finally, in short, we need to know why communities shift away from their mother tongues. We need to find appropriate solutions, sometimes top down, sometimes bottom up. to revitalize endangered languages. Thank you so much for your patience and for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. David. As we transition into the open forum, let's welcome a dedicated second year Master of Arts in Applied Linguistics student, bringing her own insights and expertise to guide this discussion. Ms. Glay Zaturalba. Ms. Glay?
Yes, hello, maayong adlaw kaninyong tanan. Good day to all of you, and of course, thank you very much, Dr. Maya Kemlani David, for such an eye-opening presentation. It was such an honor to have you here with us today. And I think that we can all agree that Dr. David's topic of language revitalization strategies and understanding why languages shift hits close to home for anyone passionate about preserving culture and heritage. Now it's our time to hear from you, our incredible audience. Let us now jump into the first part of our question and answer session. Now, if you have a question, go ahead and type it into the chat box, and I will read it out for Dr. David to respond. Or if you would like to ask your question directly, just hit that raise hand button and I'll invite you to unmute. All right, let's make this a lively conversation. The floor is open for your insights and curiosities. All right, someone just raise his yeah, first we have someone just raised her hand. One moment, okay? All right, we have Mom Cindy Kazan, a second year Master of Arts in Applied Linguistics student. Yes, Ma'am Cindy, you can now unmute your mic.
Hello, Dr. Maya. You've presented reasons for language shift and strategies for revitalization, and it is very significant on our part as linguistic students. But how can we convince people to preserve or revitalize indigenous languages, especially the elders who are the only fluent speakers in some communities, but are hesitant to pass on the language, given all the factors you've mentioned on language change or language shift, rather?
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Uh,
Thank you for that question. How can you change the attitude, the mindset of the older community members? Um, some of them are aware, they know that it's important to know your own language, but how do you change their mindset? You have to show them. I don't know if you have the materials to show them the beauty of using their own languages. Despite the fact, you know other languages. That's very good to know other languages. So don't discourage knowledge of other languages, but explain to them that your heritage is your mother tongue. So it's important to know your own language, and if you have the documented materials, you can show them through social media or through video recordings. You can show dances in their language, cultural dances, songs, music in their own language and their own musical instruments. So revive their interest in their cultural heritage, and in doing so, you might revitalize the language of their cultural heritage, their music, their dances, and maybe even their proverbs, because proverbs carry so much value to a community. And with you lose your proverbs, you lose your metaphors, you lose all this. So show them the plus points of knowing the heritage language, but don't discourage them from using other languages, because we know as linguists, we know that the more languages you have, you are actually enriched. Your brain works better when you have more languages. Different languages do different things to your mindset, to your brain, and help you see the world in a different light. So don't discourage knowledge of and use of other languages, but emphasize the richness of knowing one's own language. Now, as younger members of the community, it may be hard to persuade older members, but if you can persuade your own grandfather to, and he can be the leader, he can be a social activist on your behalf for the community. Older people listening to older people, there's more value, more prestige, rather than the older listening to the young. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Ma'am Cindy, and thank you so much, Dr. David, for that very inspiring and encouraging response. All right, we have another question. We have Sir, uh, I mean, an English language student. We have Sir Dadapan, who just raised his hand. Yes, sir, you can now. Yes, Sir Dadapan from English language.
Fullest sense, we revitalize to reinvent our language for new generation for a purpose, for expansion purposes, such as creating new terminology to adapt in a more globalized society. Thank you.
Sorry, what was the question?
My question was, what do we revitalize? Like, do we revitalize to recover traditional language, or do we revitalize to reinvent our language for new generation?
Thank you, thank you. That's a very interesting question. You know, languages are alive, languages are moving, languages are changing. You can see that even the English language dictionaries from the UK, they are introducing a lot of words from local languages, which the notion of that word is not even there in their culture, but now they are using that word in English. So languages grow, languages are constantly growing, languages are not stagnant. So when you say, can you use, as a young generation, you are introducing new words to your heritage language, it shows growth. But it's a growth of your heritage language, which is good. You still have your heritage language, and you are actually into some extent as a young generation, you're modernizing the use. Your older generation may not understand your introduction of new words to your heritage language, but it's still a growth of your heritage language. I find that the Sindhi community in Malaysia, if and when they use Sindhi, they are actually mixing it with a lot of English words. So there's a lot of code mixing and code switching. But you are not talking about that. You are talking about technical terms, for example, coming into your heritage language. And of course, social media and technical terms is something new. For the older people who don't use social media so much. So I think it's a good point you have made that you should be able to introduce new words, but so long as the new words are then documented so that other young people of your heritage, of your culture, of your community also understand the new words being introduced.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. David, for that very impactful response. And also, thank you, Sir Dadapan. Um, I know that there are still a lot of questions running in your mind right now, but as much as we would love to keep diving into your fantastic questions, we still have so much more to explore and share with you. But if you are curious to learn more or have further thoughts, please feel free to connect with Professor Dr. Maya Kimlani David after the session or throughout the conference. So again, thank you everyone for all the fantastic questions and once again a huge round of thanks to Professor Dr. Maya Kimlani David for sharing such invaluable insights today. We are grateful, Dr. David, for your expertise and guidance on the challenges and strategies for language revitalization. All right, that wraps up our Q&A session. Let's keep this energy going for the rest of the conference. Back to you, Miss Loella.
Thank you, Ms. Glyza, for guiding such an engaging discussion and to the participants who shared their questions and insights. Now, to honor our speaker's valuable contribution, we will present a certificate of recognition. Let me read to you the citation. Certificate of recognition is hereby given to Dr. Maya Kimlani David for sharing her time and expertise as resource speaker on the topic Language Revitalization Strategies, Importance of Investigating Reasons for Language Shift during the second Ilmu International Lecture Series on Applied Linguistics held on November 8, 2024 via Zoom. Thank you once again, Dr. David. Before we proceed, let's capture this moment with an obligatory group photo with our esteemed speaker. So if everyone could please turn on their cameras, we'll take a quick snapshot to remember this special moment. All right, ready? Let's all smile for the camera. Thank you so much, everyone. Now, to kick off our session in a lively note, we have a special icebreaker prepared by our AB English language students. This activity is designed to energize us and bring everyone together, setting the stage for an engaging day of learning and sharing. Let's all take part, relax, and enjoy. Students, take it away. May we have the AB English language students?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes, we
All
can
right.
hear you now clearly.
All right. So, good morning, language enthusiasts. I am Marjorie Moralde Encargas, your game master for today. To make certain of everyone's active participation, let us break the ice with a familiar and interactive game. The brief interlude is called Among Us. Among Us is a game that requires you to read, suspect, and eliminate. The mechanics of this activity is pretty similar to the odd one out game where you identify the topic that does not belong to the group in order to win the round. The topics are, of course, within the realms of linguistics, especially the concepts revolving around language shift and language oppression, which are the center of today's lecture. To make this game more engaging, the first two participants to identify the imposter by commenting the answer in the chat box will receive extra points from our esteemed instructors, Sir Saj, Sir Philip, and Ma'am Joy. Now, without further ado, let's begin with the easy round. So for the easy round, we have round one, phonetics. Options are phoneme, allophone, vowel, and minimal pair. Please comment the answer which you think is the imposter among the four options. All right. Time is up. Answer is vowel. So congratulations, Miss Althea Mapula and Chief Muammar Miranda. You just won yourselves an extra credit from our esteemed professors. Next, we have round two, language loss and preservation. Options are intergenerational transmission, loan words, language documentation, and lexicon preservation. Who do you think is the All right, time is up. The answer is loan words. So congratulations, John Oliver Ladaga and Ayer Cadas. You won yourselves extra credit. Next, the moderate level. So round three, we have syntax. Options are complementizers, auxiliary, determiner, and lexicon. Who do you think is the imposter? All right, time is up. The answer is lexicon. So congratulations, Masumpad and Lakaden. You guys just won yourselves extra credit. Next, we have round four. Concept. Options are language endangerment, bilingualism, language revival, and language maintenance. Who do you think is the imposter? All right. Time is up. Answer is bilingualism. Congratulations, Miss Gogo and Miss Gador. You won yourselves extra credit. For the final level, we have difficult round. So round 5, language suppression and erasure. Options are language revitalization, language suppression, cultural genocide, and monolingual education. Who do you think is the imposter? All right. Time is up. We only have two answers. The answer is language revitalization. So congratulations, Ladaga and Cinco. You won yourselves extra credit. All right, for the final round, we have round 6. Options policies and practices of oppression. Options are all right, monolingual education, immersion education, assimilation policy, and linguistic imperialism. Again, monolingual education, immersion education, assimilation policy, and linguistic imperialism. Who do you think is the imposter? All right. The answer is immersion education. Congratulations, Mr. Ladaga and Mr. Fuerte. You guys won yourselves extra credits. And that marks the end of our icebreaker. Congratulations to the students who won extra credits from the game. And thank you all for your active participation. I now give the floor to our ever so lovely host. Ma'am, we may proceed.
Thank you, Miss Darlene. And now we're excited to introduce our second international lecturer. Here to introduce our speaker is Ms. Kizaya Zain Francisco, one of our dedicated language faculty members. Ma'am Kizaya, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Our next international Our next international speaker is an associate professor of politics at La Trobe University, Australia. He is a political anthropologist whose work focuses broadly on the intersections of language and power. He edited the Routledge Handbook of Language Revitalization and is also the author of the recently published book by the Cornell University Press, The Politics of Language Oppression in Tibet. His academic publications have appeared in the Annual Review of Anthropology, American Anthropologist, State Crime Journal, Patterns of Prejudice, and other journals. Please help me welcome Dr. Gerald Roche.
Hi, everyone. I'm hoping that you can all hear me okay. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here today, to be able to speak with you all. I'm looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have. I'm going to share some of my thoughts about language oppression, basically giving a definition of what language oppression is, and contrasting it with other approaches that you might have already heard about today or that you might be familiar with. So I'm going to try and share my screen. See if that works. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen and everyone can hear me. If anything is, there are any problems, please interrupt and let me know. So I'm going to speak for about half an hour, and hopefully that will give us plenty of time to have a discussion afterwards. I want to begin with something we call in Australia an acknowledgement of country. So just for some context, the country of Australia was founded by European colonization that overtook and took control of many different indigenous countries over this continent. And so often when we begin an event speaking as an Australian, we acknowledge what those countries were in order to recognize the history of colonialism and the unfinished business of decolonization that is ongoing in Australia. So I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people, who are one of the members of the broader Kulin Federation. And I want to recognize that the city of Melbourne, where I live, is the site of ongoing struggles for language reclamation and revitalization for the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung language and the Bunurong language. I also want to acknowledge that the university that I work at, which is called La Trobe University, is named after a historical figure called Charles La Trobe. And Charles La Trobe was the chief governing official for the British at the time of invasion here, that who oversaw the dispossession of Aboriginal people from their lands. He oversaw the massacres and the genocides that enabled Europeans to invade this land. So there's an important and ongoing conversation about whether it's appropriate to have institutions named after people like Charles La Trobe. I'm personally of the opinion that we shouldn't have institutions named after figures who oversaw colonization and dispossession and genocide. So we're entering a period of truth-telling and treaty here in the state of Victoria, which is where Melbourne is. So we have an ongoing truth commission where Indigenous an indigenous led organization, is aiming to document the truths of colonization and its impacts, including the impacts on indigenous languages. Here, and this process is ending now, and we're moving into a period of treaty negotiations between Aboriginal peoples and the state. And I think as a part of those treaty negotiations, we should be seriously reconsidering the appropriateness of naming public institutions after colonial officials. So I'll just that's my initial remarks on that topic as a sort of preface to what I'm going to say, the kind of things I'm going to talk about. So, okay, broadly, the problem that my research deals with, the problem that I'm interested in, is the global decline of linguistic diversity. This has been a significant topic of research, particularly since the late 1980s, when we started to see internationally major linguistics institutions take this up as a problem for research and advocacy. And since that time, we have many different estimates of how many languages around the world are endangered. The estimate that I find to be the most helpful and reliable, though I also think it's probably a conservative estimate, is the estimate from the Endangered Languages Project with their catalogue of endangered languages, which is a good open access systematic resource that provides freely accessible information on all the world's endangered languages. And they estimate that just under half, I think it's around 46% of the world's languages, are currently endangered. And so that means that the intergenerational transmission of those languages is collapsing, that they are losing membership in the language community, and if that trend continues unabated, that those languages will no longer be in use anymore. And what that statistic suggests is that we are headed for a world of much reduced linguistic diversity. And so I'm interested in thinking about that as a global political problem. However, at the same time, it's also a very local problem because it exists in specific ways in specific communities. It's not a problem that affects everyone equally. So, for example, for the majority of Australians, are monolingual in English, and they don't think about this problem, and it really doesn't impact their life in any way. The people who are impacted by this tend to be, in the global scheme of things, relatively vulnerable groups. So they're indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities, and so on, other groups like this. So even though it's a global problem, it doesn't impact everyone equally, and people tend to be concerned about it and think about it and affected by it relative to their privilege. So the other local dimension of it is the way in which local communities around the world are working to maintain and revitalize their languages. So the impacted communities are often struggling to resist the loss of their language. And sometimes that struggle to resist language loss can take the form of an explicit public protest movement, people marching in the streets, holding signs and things like this. But more often than not, that resistance takes the form of kind of an everyday political struggle that is woven into the fabric of people's regular lives, right? So that work to maintain and revitalize languages is supported by a range of different experts. Some of them work in universities, some of them work in civil society organizations, some of them work in governments. Those experts come from a wide range of disciplines. There are linguists, there are anthropologists, sociologists, applied linguists, political theorists, political philosophers, and so on. And it takes a wide range of perspectives to think about this issue and to address it at the global and local levels. And that's the broad context within which I situate my work. So I'm just going to talk about like two common approaches to the problem of language endangerment before outlining my own approach. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is from linguistic anthropology. So linguistic anthropology, over the last couple of decades, the research around this problem of global language loss and language endangerment has primarily been based on ethnographic research. And so ethnographic research means you go somewhere, you live with the community, you learn the language, you participate in everyday life, and you kind of hang out. But you hang out in a systematic way, you gather data while you're hanging out with people, but it's a highly qualitative research method through the lived experience of the researcher themselves participating in what people do from day to day. And in anthropological research on this problem of language loss, one of the key concepts that has been used to help understand what is happening is language ideology. So language ideology is basically, we can basically summarize it as what are the things that people in that community believe about languages. So, that might include, for example, their understanding of what language is, how language works, what its relationship is to identity, how languages change over time, what causes a language to become endangered, and what they can do to intervene in that situation. So people have lots of beliefs about languages, and they are often not aware of what those beliefs are, and they often don't express those beliefs explicitly. So the anthropologist has to learn about those language ideologies just by kind of hanging around, watching people, listening to what they say, and observing how they react to different situations. One of the key problems that anthropologists have explored through the use of ethnographic research and theories of language ideology is what has come to be known as the revitalization paradox. So the revitalization paradox is the idea that if you go into communities where people are using endangered languages and you ask them why, how do you feel about this, what do you want to do about it, etc., very often large sectors of the community will say, we are worried about this, we want to do something about it. However, when you observe the behavior that people engage in, they either aren't consistently acting in line with those desires, or they are engaging in activities that actively work against those aims and goals that they have stated. So anthropologists trace the roots of this language revitalization paradox to language ideologies that people hold. Essentially, that people have unhelpful beliefs and understandings about language that lead them to engage in contradictory behaviors which do not support the maintenance and revitalization of the language. So this has kind of been one of the key contributions of linguistic anthropology to this field. And the other thing that I would note about this is that, in particular, it's been dominated by North American linguistic anthropologists. That this idea of language ideology and its application to the problem of language endangerment and language loss, it's really dominated primarily by a handful of anthropologists from the United States of America, and I'm happy to talk about who those are if you're curious later on. This also means that it tends to be dominated by case studies from North America, and although there are a few case studies from Asia and elsewhere, it's primarily North American case studies and North American theorists that we meet in this approach. Okay, so a second way of approaching this issue comes out of not necessarily only sociolinguists. It's also a set of tools which is widely adopted by applied linguists and regular linguists, I guess. And this is the idea of language vitality. So the concept of language vitality actually emerged in the Australian context of studying migrant languages way back in the late 1970s, but it has since been formalized into a kind of a standard approach, which is promoted by by UNESCO and the United Nations more broadly, and they have this what they call a 9-factor model, where it's been updated. Anyway, they have a standard model of language vitality that they use. So in terms of research, as this approach focusing on language vitality does not rely so heavily on ethnographic methods. You don't need to go to a place, spend huge amounts of time learning languages and understanding culture and hanging around in this approach. Language vitality research tends to use more standardized, formulaic research methods and protocols like rubrics and surveys to gather data on the community and their language. So you can get a sense of what these kind of rubrics look like from the right-hand side. So they would ask questions about, if we start in the top left-hand corner, what is the number of speakers? What is the rate of intergenerational transmission? What is the community members' attitudes, right? And so rather than going in and observing these things, researchers working in this tradition would often simply go in and ask, like, are you positive about the language? Are you negative about it? Etc. And so we have a bunch of other criteria that people will use to assess the vitality of the language. And so this gets to the key, which is different from language ideology. Language ideology is essentially like a property of people's minds. It's how people think about language. Language vitality is a property of the language itself, essentially. And it looks at how strong a language is, right? Whether it has all the resources, the institutions, the policies that it needs to exist sustainably. And the key problem that has been investigated in this tradition is the idea of reversing language shift, which comes from the late American scholar Joshua Fishman. And he proposed this model of reversing language shift by reclaiming domains. So I'll just explain what that means. So a domain is kind of like a unique context in which a language can be used. We might think about education, media, healthcare, business, entertainment, etc., as distinct domains. And this idea of promoting language vitality is that the language essentially needs to be put back into those domains if it's no longer in them, and that once a language is fully used across all the domains, that will support its vitality. We also have here on the bottom left-hand corner, you can see there's this category of response to new domains, so that as new domains like technology appear, the language needs to go into those domains and sort of fill up the gaps, and that will give it vitality. And all of the other things like the materials for the language, the quality of documentation, institutional policies, etc., the attitudes, all of those support the language to be used in those domains. And the idea is that a language that is fully used across domains will be safe and will be transmitted across generations. So this is the language vitality approach from sociolinguistics, applied linguistics, and sort of more mainstream linguistics. And now I'm going to contrast those two approaches with the way that I think about these issues through the concept of language oppression. I'll talk a little bit about that. So language oppression, it's an idea that I've been developing or working on over the course of a number of years. It's not my idea. I didn't come up with the concept. I'll introduce where it comes from in a minute. But I've done my most fully developed work on the concept in my book, which is going to be published next week. Yeah, next week, next Friday, exactly. So exactly a week from now, I'll be doing the launch of this book. And so that's where I do my most sort of complete unpacking of the concept of language oppression. But I have a number of other online publications. Most of them are open access, and so anyone can read them. I'll give you a reference for one of them, but later in this slide. But basically, so the idea of, my critique of those two approaches, like I have different critiques of both of them, but on the whole, I would say that they fail to provide a full political account of language shift, of what's going on. And by a full political account, I mean an account that will link broad structural factors like colonialism, racism, capitalism, nationalism, etc., broad power structures, to individual and community behaviors. And I think that understanding that link between the extremely large macro scale and the micro scale of individuals, families, and communities, tying those two together is extremely important. So if I was thinking about, for example, the language ideologies approach, it tends to stay stuck at the level of the community, right? It thinks about what is the language ideology in this community and how can that ideology be transformed, but it doesn't attend enough to the broader political, historical context that community is in. Sociolinguistics approach of language vitality sort of does the other. It looks at the broader context, particularly those domains of language that exist more widely in society, but it doesn't really drill down to the individual and community level. So, for example, it doesn't explain how you get the language into the domains. It doesn't explain why the language already isn't in domains, etc. So in both of those approaches, in failing to link the kind of large scale and small scale of language shift, what happens is that they fail to provide us with a meaningful path forward to transformative political change that would enable the language to continue. And I'm happy to discuss further what I mean by that, but hopefully also some of the rest of the discussion will illustrate what I mean by that. So yeah, so after using both of those approaches in my work and then eventually finding them unsatisfactory, I was looking for another way of thinking about this problem. And I came across this extremely thoughtful and thought-provoking essay by Alice Taff and her colleagues, which is on Indigenous language use impact wellness. And they start off right from the beginning saying that the problem that we intend to examine is language oppression, not language endangerment, not language vitality, not language shift, but language oppression. And they define language oppression as the enforcement of language loss by physical, mental, social, and spiritual coercion. And when I came across that term, it was like a little light bulb went off in my head, and it made a sort of immediate, intuitive sense to me, and I've been working with that idea ever since. So I think one of the things that the idea of language oppression does is that it enables us to compare language oppression to other forms of oppression, right? Racial oppression, gender oppression, and so on, right? And that enables us to link conversations about language to other structures of domination. Then we can start pulling in theories and concepts and case studies and methods from other areas that have spent much longer developing those tools and bring them into the study of language. And that's kind of what I tried to do in my book and in some of my theoretical work. So specifically, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but I'm happy to answer questions. Like specifically what my work did in particular in the book was to develop some of the theories of the philosopher Michel Foucault and apply them to the problem of language oppression. And the key aim in there was to link broad scale forces to individual and collective behaviors. And I think the key problem that any adequate theory of language oppression has to understand is why and how people come to participate in their own oppression. Because this is necessary in the case of language endangerment. Language has become endangered through a process of collapsing intergenerational transmission. That requires essentially parents to withhold a language from their children, or it requires children to refuse to learn the language of the parents. In either case, there is an intergenerational manifestation of broader oppressive relationships in society. So we normally think of oppressive relationships as being sort of distant and distinct, where a dominant group enforces something through violence upon a oppressed population. Foucault's work gives us a sort of a complex series of theoretical tools for thinking about how oppression is much more subtle, much more integrated into everyday life, and requires the participation of people in their own oppression. So one of the articles where I talk about this a little bit is this article in the journal Patterns of Prejudice, and also furthermore in the book. But the thing to take away there is basically what I've done is to solve that problem of linking the broad scale structural to the individual and communal level, is that I've taken theories from political philosophy, and particularly the work of Michel Foucault, and I can talk a little bit about which ideas I think are helpful later on if you want to know more. Okay, so the reason why I think thinking about language oppression is important is because it provides a new set of pathways forward to maintain and revitalize Indigenous languages that are different from the practical methods that are suggested by linguistic anthropology and sociolinguistics, and the focus on language ideology and language vitality. When we start thinking about language oppression as being about the interplay of political forces, that enables us to think about different types of actions that we can engage in that are primarily political actions, which enable us to maintain and revitalize endangered languages. So just this morning, I got the article, the proof copy for this article, which will be published shortly, hopefully in the next week or two. But this is an article where I'm developing some of these ideas. I'll get to that in a second. The main point that I want to start out is that even though we're talking about languages, linguistics as a discipline does not necessarily supply us with the tools that we need to intervene successfully in this situation. Expertise from linguistics is relevant and necessary, but not sufficient to solve the problems that we are facing. Linguistics and linguists have to cooperate with other people with different forms of knowledge to adequately solve these problems. So I'm just going to briefly mention like two bodies of knowledge and applied practice that I think are very useful for thinking about problems of language maintenance and revitalization. So one is the idea of language rights. So language rights draws on the broader human rights tradition in thinking about language as something that people are inherently entitled to, that they are able to make claims on, and which someone, usually the state, the government, is obliged to deliver something to them, right? So thinking about language in relation to rights enables us to compare language maintenance and language revitalization efforts to other rights-based campaigns, right? So rights around fundamental rights like civic and political rights, rights around gender, sexuality, and so on. There's a whole broad range of human rights campaigns and concepts that the language maintenance and revitalization movements can draw on. But then secondly, on a broader theoretical level, I think that we can also turn to social movement theory, which is like a branch of political political theory or political science, depending on how you think about the problem. And social movement theory is the study of how social change is created and sustained by it's created by sustained collective action, so protest movements essentially. And there is a really 75 years of research in this area that we can turn to that helps us understand how social change is created by collective action. And there are loads of debates in this area that can inform our thinking about how to successfully maintain languages. Like, how do you get people to participate? How do you selectively, how do you successfully put pressure on people in power to create the changes that you need when you have less power than them? What kind of tactics and strategies have other movements used? What kind of risks do activists encounter, and how do they deal with them? How do different activist movements work together in order to pursue their goals? How do they use storytelling and language more broadly to convince people to understand these problems and to participate in the movement? So I think turning to social movement theory with a politically informed understanding of language oppression, I think that is kind of key to successfully pursuing the maintenance and revitalization of endangered languages everywhere. So I will stop there and let's chat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosh. Following that insightful lecture, we now open the floor for an interactive discussion. So to guide us through this open forum, we are pleased to have Jomar Fortes as our moderator. Mr. Fortes is a dedicated second-year Master of Arts in Applied Linguistics student and will lead this engaging session. Mr. Jomar?
Maayong buntag kaninyong tanan. Good morning to everyone. Before we continue, I must say that Doc Gerald Roche's presentation was truly illuminating. You know, his words really resonated with me, and I'm sure many of us feel the same, right? You know, it is undeniable that this issue deserves our full attention, and I couldn't agree more with your call for collective action and awareness. Now, consider the reality. Many of these languages, which have existed for centuries, are disappearing at an alarming rate. Speakers silenced not by choice, but by systemic forces. This is the sobering fact of language oppression, a force that manipulates power dynamics and reshapes the way we communicate. Today, we are fortunate to have with us Dr. Rosh, whose work shines a light on these critical issues and sparking conversation about language ideology, vitality, and the very real consequences of linguistic hegemony. Let us take this opportunity to understand the relationship between language and power, investigate how power influences the words we use, and challenge ourselves to consider how we as a global community can advocate for the preservation of linguistic diversity. This time, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to join the conversation. Let's make this an engaging and meaningful dialogue. You can now ask questions by typing them in the comment section or just by clicking the raise hand button. Or you're welcome to ask your question to Doc Rosh aloud. Just unmute yourself when you're ready, okay? Okay. Yes, Mr. Delepan, I appreciate you raising your hand. Please go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you. So, to Dr. Roach, you've mentioned earlier that a language that fills all domains are safe, such as English, which is primarily used in many domains. So, do you think, in relation to standardizing indigenous language, could help those indigenous language fill fill in the gaps in those domains. Is it possible, sir, that standardizing them could, for example, in technology, could empower those indigenous language, could fill those gaps, and therefore stop oppression on those behalves?
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for that question. So, yeah, I'm kind of reluctant to take strong stances on issues like language standardization and domains and so on, because I think that a lot of those are context dependent. It really depends on the local situation, culturally, socially, and politically, in terms of what is going to work in that particular situation. The way that I would think about this problem would be to think about, in that context, if people want to engage in the standardization of their language, can they do that? Right? Is it legal for them to do that? Are they supported to do that with resources from the government, etc.? Can they organize that independently, or do they have to go through particular government channels in order to do that, etc.? So, like, I think that like the way that I approach this issue is that I'm not going to give anyone answers about what should and shouldn't be done. I think that those have to be negotiated by communities themselves according to their detailed understanding of local contexts. So I instead of answering your question, I would raise a series of other questions instead. That's the way that I look at these things. So it's not so much about whether standardization is going to work or not, but can people do the standardization? Are they going to be supported to do it? Is there support from the community, from the government? Is there going to be resistance from other communities and so on? So one of the topics that I research is the way that mainstream communities respond negatively to the revitalization of minority and indigenous languages. That's an example of the political dimension of these issues. So we can think about, for example, if people set about standardizing their language, what will the mainstream community reaction be? Will they be supported, or will they be attacked for doing that? In almost every situation that I'm familiar with, any activism or activity in support of a minority or indigenous languages will be attacked by the majority. Right? So those are the kind of issues that I would draw attention to rather than the standardization itself. So I know that I didn't answer your question, but I hope the answer is helpful anyway.
Well, thank you so much, Doc Rosh. And now I also acknowledge you raise your hand, Mr. Hinkle. Go ahead with your question. Just unmute yourself when speaking. Go ahead, sir.
Excuse me. So my question is, in this age, globalization is obviously prominent, bringing with it the spread of the English language around the world. So my question is, in what ways does this impact the dynamics of language oppression, particularly for indigenous languages?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So, I guess that I'm a little bit critical of the way that globalization is spoken about as a threat to indigenous and minority languages. Like, globalization is often seen as this like dark cloud that hangs over everything, sort of blocking out the sun. It's this weird, mysterious force that does something, but we don't know who is doing it, why it's happening, how it happens. I would always encourage people to sort of dig down deeply into the specific processes that constitute globalization and the specific actors who are doing the things that are globalization. So when we think about, for example, the global spread of English, I think we have to look at least two different things which kind of get covered up by globalization. So the first thing is the historical legacies of colonialism, right? So English, so my ancestors are Irish before we came to Australia. My family was in Ireland. We spoke Irish. We were colonized by the British. The British then drove my ancestors out of Ireland into Australia, where my ancestors then colonized the lands of Indigenous people and forced the English language onto them. And this is like we have centuries of this happening that underlies the spread of English around the world. So it wasn't an accident, and it's not globalization. It's colonialism. Now that's an historical fact. It happened in the past, but that doesn't mean it's irrelevant to the present. There are things that can be done to undo the harms of colonialism. So one of the issues I'm interested in is reparations. So the payments to formerly dominated, enslaved, or colonized peoples, right? If you think about the potential for reparations in relation to the English language, then you could think about the British owing millions of dollars to the world for the harm that they have done in oppressing Indigenous and minority languages. And I think it's reasonable to have those conversations about what is the concrete material responsibility of the current British government for the harms of previous colonial acts of the British Empire. So that's one thing. The second thing that I would say that we need to look at instead of globalization is the English teaching and learning industry, which is a massive global multi-billion-dollar industry. Because it's a source of profit, it is something that people are invested in protecting and maintaining. So people everywhere are not just learning English because it's a useful language to know. They're learning English because it's a profitable business, and there are multiple companies that are extremely powerful and promote their services around the world to people. And those businesses are often supported by governments. So just to give a concrete example, in Australia, the second largest export industry in Australia is our university education system. So we take international students from around the world, but particularly from Asia. We charge them very high fees to study at our university, and we depend on them knowing English to integrate into our university system. And if they don't know English, we force them to go to commercial language centers and pay until they can produce an adequate qualification that they can study, and then we charge them for the university degree. Right? So like in Australia, we continue to actively exploit the colonial legacies of the British Empire in order to profit off people from other countries in the region. So I think globalization is not the best term to talk about what's going on there, right? We need to think about it in relation to colonialism and capitalism. And then we can start talking about the impacts that it has on Indigenous and minority languages, but also more importantly, we can talk about like how to resist and undo those political dynamics, because that's perhaps more important. So then just to kind of like briefly tack on an answer to your question, like global English in most of the contexts that I'm familiar with is not the immediate threat to Indigenous and minority languages. Typically the threat comes from either a national dominant language or a dominant ethnic or regional language. So for example, in China, Where I worked, it's Mandarin Chinese, which is threatening most indigenous languages in the country. It's not English. Or it's the Tibetan language, which is threatening small linguistic minorities within the Tibetan ethnic group. So it's an ethnic language which is threatening them. The role of English in those dynamics is to take resources out of the system, including people's time, and forcing them to study a language that they don't want or need to know very often. So English is a compulsory language across all of China, but most of the country's indigenous languages are not taught in schools and are not used as a medium of instruction in school. If you took English out of that equation, that would free up space to use those other languages. But in order for those languages to be used, you would need like a significant political change in the country to bring about that kind of self-determination and inclusion for those communities. So the problem, English is a problem, but it's not the big problem, I would say. So hopefully that gives you some kind of answer to your question.
Thank you so much for those practical answers, Doc. And now, thank you also for raising your hand, Ms. Manso. Please share your thoughts or ask your questions.
Wait. So am I audible?
Yep, I can hear you.
Thank you, thank you. Anyway, so my question is in the context of language oppression, and as the world is increasingly dominated by global communication networks, does linguistic diversity still hold the same cultural and intellectual value, or has its relevance diminished in favor of dominant global languages? Because where technology facilitates communication across borders and languages alike, such as English, Mandarin, and Spanish, and because because of globalization, efficiency and convenience is becoming more prevalent. So in the sense, is the use or preservation of lesser known languages still seen as something crucial, or is it romanticized into like becoming a nostalgic pursuit of the old identities we have during back in our days?
Yep. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question. And once again, I'm going to give a slightly unusual answer to that question. So the approach that I advocate, looking at the problem of language oppression, the emphasis is first and foremost on the oppressive relationships rather than the language and their utilities. So if we start out looking at the problem from a utility perspective, we ask questions like, what is the value of the language? Does it have economic benefits? Will it give me a cognitive benefit and improve my brain function? Will it integrate me into national society? Is the language a storehouse of indigenous knowledge and wisdom, etc.? When we start out by asking questions of utility, that very quickly and easily becomes a justification to eliminate languages that are not perceived as having utility. And in situations where you have unequal power relationships, that decision about the utility will always be made by people in power who can basically decide whatever they want. So my concern is that utility justifications for language maintenance and revitalization are always vulnerable to abuse by within the context of power hierarchies. However, if we start off not even thinking about the language and we think about the social and political relationships and focus on the oppression, then the question that we ask is very different. And instead of thinking about the language utility, we ask ourselves, is this oppressive relationship fair and just? Do we want this oppressive relationship to continue? What are the harms and other negative consequences of this oppressive relationship? And I think even when you just start using the word oppression and you start focusing on those questions rather than the languages themselves, the answers are very clear. Like, there's nothing positive about oppression. There's nothing good about oppression. There's no utility in oppression. I don't think it's kind of romantic or naive or nostalgic to say that oppression is bad, right? And in terms of the harms, like some of the other research that I've done is looking at the ways that language oppression is harmful on a physical, biological level in terms of impacting people's health and well-being. And I don't want to go into all of the details of that because that would be a completely separate talk. But the general point that I would make is that, like, language oppression is not only unjust in terms of it being an oppressive relationship, but that it also specifically harms the people who suffer under language oppression. And so the question is it fair for those people to suffer those harms? And the answer is no. Like, a good society is equal and just, and everyone has equal chances, and everyone is equally spared harms, and so on. And so when we focus on those political questions, or when we focus on the political dimensions of the issue, we ask different questions and we get very different answers quite quickly. In terms of all those other questions that you asked about the utility of languages, like, I would simply just not I would simply just not ask those questions. I would direct attention towards other questions. Yeah. So once again, I have not answered your question, but I hope I've provided some insight that will help you think about the problem in a different way.
Thank you so much, Doc Roch. It really addresses the necessity of creating spaces where all languages can coexist and thrive. We greatly appreciate all your insightful questions. Unfortunately, due to time constraint, we would be able to address all of them today. However, we encourage you to reach out with any remaining inquiries, and we will make sure to follow up you with afterward. Your engagement is highly valued, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. And now we would like to thank Doc Roch for his invaluable insights and for guiding us through such a crucial topic. You know, your words have not only informed us, but also inspired us to think critically about the role of language in our world. As we conclude, I encourage each of you to instill the lessons to heart and consider how we can advocate for linguistic diversity in our communities. Now it's time to hand the spotlight back to our host. Thank you for your participation, and let's continue this important conversation moving forward.
Thank you so much, Sir Jomar and Dr. Rosh. As we show our appreciation, we would like to present you with a certificate of recognition. Let me read the citation. Certificate of recognition is hereby given to Dr. Gerald Roche for sharing his time and expertise as resource speaker on the topic language oppression during the second ilmu International Lecture Series on Applied Linguistics held on November 8, 2024 via Zoom. Once again, thank you, Dr. Roche, for being with us and contributing so profoundly in today's event. Now let's have a special moment to capture today's wonderful gathering. I would like to invite everyone to join us for a virtual photo with our speaker. For a virtual photo opportunity. So please turn on your cameras and get ready to smile as we commemorate this event together. Let's create a snapshot of the incredible connections we've made today. And the count of three, let's all say applied linguistics. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Applied linguistics. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for being such a great sport. With that, we kindly ask everyone to take a few moments to complete our evaluation form. Your feedback is incredibly valuable to us. It helps us understand what worked well and how we can make future sessions even better. The evaluation form link has been shared in the screen, so please don't forget to fill it out before you leave. Your insights and thoughts will make a big difference. As we approach the conclusion of our event, I am pleased to welcome Assistant Professor Joy R. Rosanor, CAS Associate Dean, to deliver a closing remarks. Ma'am Joy?
To the administrators of the University of Southeastern Philippines, represented by the Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Jennifer C. Nueva, who also happens to be a faculty member of the Master of Arts in Applied Linguistics program, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Marnie Grace I. Sonico, the Director of the Institute of Languages and Creative Arts, Mr. Francis N. Rino, the Program Head of the Bachelor of Arts in English Language Program, Associate Professor Sajad S. Ingilan, the Faculty of CAS, specifically Dr. Catherine M. Roble, the Institution of the English Language Program in USEP. Organizers, students, and guests, good morning. First of all, I would like to congratulate the officers of the Linguistic Society, Student Society, and the BALL students, together with the CAS faculty of the CAS faculty for organizing this second ilmu International Lecture Series. The time and effort you have poured into organizing this series have given students an opportunity to learn from experts in applied linguistics, some updates on recent trends in English language studies and applied linguistics. Speaking of the students, our audience, they're the ones that I would like to congratulate next because their attendance and active participation in today's lectures must have given them some eureka moments that would be valuable in crafting their own research proposals. Finally, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to our guests from various countries who are also renowned scholars in the world. Thank you for your messages and lectures today, Dr. Muhammad Alakad of University Malaya, Malaysia. Associate Professor Dr. Nasrin Abdillah of University Technology Mara, Malaysia. Associate Professor Dr. Rodney C. Jubilado of the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Professor Dr. Maya Kemlani David of the University Malaya, Malaysia. And Associate Professor Dr. Gerald Brosh. Daghang salamat for being generous with your time and knowledge. Sa maulang to, congratulations to the organizers and audience. And thank you very much to all our speakers and lecturers. Maayong buntag kanatong tanan.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Joy. As we come to the close of our enlightening session today, let us take a moment to reflect and express our gratitude. I would like to invite Brent Lloyd Likayan to lead us in the closing prayer.
Mata bulan, matak daw Semanil kumba yung kekinian Ketlahus na kifutay na Kolbel bulul na afi Hambala kung lubuk kung pudi Hunik daw ni Nombong ami bakung kat ketol Bekat kelapang mun gantang lubuk mool Sumjoblong fasang hololong Nguyagam ni kestifun bang ofulen Amadota mamulu Demi mundung langit na tanang ke Demi ma Mong selamat berleung
want to share a little something to look forward to. Mark your calendars because the third Elmo lecture series is already in the works for next year. And of course, our kinasing-kasing pagpasalamat to each and every one of you for joining us today. Your participation and engagement have made this event a truly remarkable experience, and we are grateful for the insights and enthusiasm you've shared. As we bid farewell, let us carry forward the knowledge we've gained and the connections we've made. We hope to see you again in the future events. Until then, ang ting kanunay and madugi na salamat.